Hello, welcome to the next section of the full read-through of The Great Cosmic Mother. The incredible, genius, dense book that completely changed my life and I'm convinced could change the world. If it were taken seriously, if it were consumed at all, which is part of why I'm doing this read through, is to make it easier to consume. Since there's no audiobook, and I mostly listen to audiobooks, this is one of the few books that I literally read, but did start listening as audio, as I've mentioned before, from Cassandra Faye Floyd on her YouTube channel. So once again, as a reminder, if you want to hear this book read by someone with a lot more personality, I highly recommend Cassandra Faye Floyd. I will link to her channel below. And she has tons of other amazing content on her channel. She has put a lot out. A lot of really, really transformative, incredible stuff. So, highly recommend her. In the meantime, I'll continue reading in my slightly autistic, monotone voice, just in case you're enjoying that. I'm happy if you are. White and male voice, I should also add, given the context of this book. But I'm grateful to be able to have some small part in spreading the messages and essential ideas that are in this book, regardless of how I was born and how I was raised in a very, very patriarchal religion, which I'm grateful for that. Gave me some incredible contrast. Nothing like no way to enjoy the beauty of heaven without first suffering in hell, which I did. All right. So, this next section, Women as Culture Creators, starts on page 33. And we are going to read this section and the next one, which will end all of section 1. So I think that'll be plenty for this reading. Here we go. When we say that women created most of early human culture, we are not trying to sound radical. The evidence is there, quite tangible. When we realize how many basic life industries were the inventions of women, cooking, food processing and storage, ceramics, weaving, textiles and design, tanning and dyeing, everything related to fire, e.g. chemistry and metallurgy, the medicinal arts, language itself, and the first scripts and glyphs, grain domestication, animal domestication, religious imagery and ritual, domestic and sacred architecture, the first calendars and the origins of astronomy, and on, then we don't need to project our imaginations far back into the past to confirm these inventions. They are still all around us today. They constitute our world. Stolen and mechanized by several thousand years of patriarchal exploitation, most of these inventions have been turned into grossly alienated and profiteering mass market industries. We do have to use our imaginations to remember that all were once warm, personal, and lovingly tended arts and crafts, originated and sustained by early communities of women. This information is radical in the true sense of the word. Radical comes from radix, root, and means going to the root of things. These cultural inventions of early women were at the very root of human existence. They created what we know as human life. Evelyn Reed, an anthropologist, Marxist, and feminist, has written extensively about women's early social forms and inventions. In The Myth of Women's Inferiority and Women's Evolution, Reed describes how human culture developed out of women's labor groups, interrelations, and first crafts. Quote, "It was the female of the species who had the care and responsibility of feeding, tending, and protecting the young. However, as Marx and Engels have demonstrated, all societies, both past and present, are founded upon labor. So it was not simply the capacity of women to give birth that played the decisive role, for all females give birth. What was decisive for the human species was the fact that maternity led to labor. It was in the fusion of maternity and labor that the first human social system was founded. It was women who became the chief producers, the workers and farmers, the leaders in scientific, intellectual, and cultural life. In the language of primitive peoples, the term mother is identical with producer procreatrix. End quote. It was a society where power was linked with real love. Among the earliest examples of Stone Age peoples found living today, such as the Kalahari Bushmen and the Bambudi Pygmies of Africa, the same linkage occurs. Female authority is valued, and both sexes are mothers to the young. Contrary to the bloody tooth and claw theories of popular aggression-oriented anthropologists, evidence shows that the farther back we go in human history, the gentler our species was. This is because the early matrifocal groups were concentrated on maintaining rather than exploiting life. Evelyn Reed shows that during the food-gathering epoch, stretching over hundreds of thousands of years, the human group's main nourishment was supplied by the women collectors, who dug the earth for edible roots, plants, and grubs, collected fruit and nuts, and hunted such small animals as lizards and hares. Large game hunting kept the men away for long periods of time and didn't always bring enough meat. Among hunting and gathering people today, the women's food collecting activities provide 75 to 85% of their group's daily nourishment. Over these thousands of years of food gathering, women's keen knowledge of herbs and plant properties was developed through trial and error, testing, and practical experience into the arts of medicinal healing. Ultimately, women's food collecting developed into agriculture as women observed the relation between scattered seeds and plant growth. This female invention, based on generations of experimentation with seed cultivation, cutting and grafting, and grain storage, brought about the vast Neolithic revolution circa 10,000 BC. The women's digging sticks were humanity's first tools, and women's work the prototype for all industry that followed. Much of the small game that women hunted and snared was brought back alive to the camp. Sometimes the young of animals killed by the male hunters was captured and brought back alive too. These animals were often kept as pets and provided the first experiments in animal training and domestication, which finally led to stock breeding. Motherless animal young often suckled the women's breasts, as captured bear cubs do today among the Ainu of Japan. So, even the domestication of animals had its roots in women's maternity. Later, cattle breeding became an extremely male-oriented activity, like so many others, but originally it was women's. Among the ancient Arabs, women not only made and owned the family tents, they also owned the herds. World myths, folk traditions, and anthropological studies agree that women first discovered how to use and produce fire. In a survey of 224 modern tribal societies, it was found that fires were made and tended always or usually by women in 84 societies. Almost all these societies have legends telling of the early times when women were the exclusive owners of fire. Ritual maintenance of fire remained entrusted to women down through historic times, such as the Vestal Virgins of ancient Rome or the Irish nuns of St. Brigid, from the originally Celtic goddess Brigid, or bride, who tended a perpetual fire at Kildare until the suppression of the monasteries under Henry VIII. Fire is sacred to the Moon Mother. Cooking, boiling, roasting, baking, steaming was only one of the techniques women acquired from their mastery of directed heat. Fire was the tool of tools. Through its use, foods could be dried and conserved for future use, and some poisonous plants and fruits made edible. It was women who developed all the early associated industries of cooking and ceramics in which fire was the critical tool. Women built the first granaries and storehouses for provisions. Some of these were sunk into the earth, while on marshy ground they were upraised on stilts. Women domesticated the cat to protect these granaries from rodents. Cats, since immemorial time, have had a special relationship with women. Among European witches, cats acted as familiars and were believed to have telepathic power, which is why special bonfires were erected during the Inquisition to burn all the cats in town along with the women. Industry, science, and human need were combined in women's work, and the daily tasks were infused with magical meaning. Women converted plants and herbs into medicines. Some substances discovered by women are still used today for their narcotic properties, and World Health Organization figures show that 95% of the world's healthcare today is still provided by women, using many of these ancient remedies. Women designed and produced containers and vessels out of materials like wood, bark, fibers, and leather. Fire was used to hollow out wood, a technique that could then be used to make canoes and boats from tree trunks. All these tremendous discoveries were related to daily survival, yet they were also experienced as magic transformations of raw material into something completely different, especially through the alchemy of fire. Consider the chemistry of bread making, the planting of the seed and its growth through combinations of moon, sun, rain, and tilled earth, the careful harvesting and grinding the grain into flour. Then, with the correct combination of water, yeast, and fire, the original seed is transformed into bread, the human food. The original beehive-shaped or domed ovens, found all over the world, could be used only by women. The oven was seen symbolically as the belly of the great goddess. Many miniature pottery models have been found in the southeast of Europe depicting Neolithic shrines. In the shrines there are ovens, clay altars originally covered with wooden planks, horned thrones, figurines of women worshippers, and wall images showing rain symbols and magical grinding of grain. In these regions there are still women's rituals of celebration involving the sacred New Year bread dough, which is held communally in the upraised arms of the elder women of the group. The textile industries also originated in women's work. Women developed cordage techniques, the weaving of bark and grass fibers into baskets and textiles. Women were the leather makers, tanning and working the skins, softened the skins by chewing them, as the polar Eskimos still do. The skin scraper, along with the digging stick, was a woman's tool everywhere and is so still among the Eskimo people. The cured leather was then made into tents, clothes, boots, straps, and cords. These were brightly ornamented with vegetable and mineral dyes, another complex chemical process invented by women. Women were everywhere the first potters. In World of the Maya, archaeologist Victor W. von Hagen writes, quote, "Pottery was woman. All we see of the remains of the Maya ceramic art was done by women. It is a fact that should be stressed. In almost every place where pottery making was on an archaic level, Africa or Melanesia, pottery was woman-made and its design woman-inspired. Throughout the area of the Amazon, pottery was a woman's task. Women were the potters, so far as we know, in ancient Peru. Early Greek and early Egyptian pottery was also woman-made until the introduction of the potter's wheel. Sir Lindsay Scott is certain that it was only after the introduction of the potter's wheel that pottery became, as the drawings on the walls of Thebes show, exclusively masculine. This suggests that all the superbly beautiful patterns found on pottery, as well as weaving, were conceived by women. Perhaps then, art is a woman." End quote. Pot making involved the creation of entirely new substances that did not already exist in nature. The beginnings of pottery are unknown, insofar as the first pots were unbaked and didn't survive. But the earliest fired ceramics found so far, including fine burnished and painted wares, date from the late 7th millennium BC. These already reveal a mastery of ceramic technology, mixing special kinds of earth with water in exactly the right proportions, molding a piece of clay into a shape, then heating it to over 600 degrees Celsius in ovens or kilns built by women. The change must have seemed a magic transmutation, from dust or mud into a substance almost as hard and durable as stone, and a substance made with water that could hold water. Women decorated their pots, the coloring changing with the firing process. Art developed out of the potter's craft, and out of the pottery decorations developed, there is little doubt, the written language. Some pots were used for daily life, others for ritual purposes. Sacred pots were painted with mystic symbols that became standardized over millennia, and these acted as a kind of shorthand language understood by all. Among the people there was a common understanding of the commonly held mythic tradition. Material fact and ritual activity were shared daily between the women who made the pots and those who used them. The artist could therefore communicate abstractly through the magic signs, and over the ages these symbols evolved into glyphs, and then character or phonetic scripts. Graphic designs, ideograms, were used for thousands of years in Old Neolithic Europe. Maria Gimbutas in Goddesses and Gods of Old Europe, 6500 to 3500 BC, says that there were two categories of ideograms, those signifying water and rain, V's, zigzags, chevrons, meanders, and spirals, all related to the snake and bird goddess, and those related to the moon, to becoming, to the vegetal life cycle, the rotation of the seasons, the birth and growth essential to life. These moon signs were the cross, the encircled cross, signifying the four quarters of the world, the year as a journey, embracing the four cardinal directions of the cosmic cycle, the crescent, the horns, the caterpillar, the egg, and the fish. All were symbols of the continuum of life, which the ideograms were meant to ensure, and of the great moon goddess of life and death, of cosmos, earth, and vegetation. The horns, the lunar crescent, and cross were all originally alternative symbols for the waxing and waning moon. Sequences of inscribed linear signs have also been found. These are a form of very ancient and until recently unknown Neolithic, Chalcolithic script dating from circa 5000 BC, which is 2,000 years before the development of Sumerian literature civilization. According to male historical tradition, the earliest examples of written language were found at the temple of the Queen of Heaven in Erech, which was the sacred city of the Sumerian goddess. These were clay tablets inscribed about 5,000 years ago, but even then the goddess at Erech had long been known as the inventor of clay tablets. Clay was sacred to women and the goddess, of language and of the original alphabet or picture script. It is known that a special sacred language was used by women initiates of the goddess until late in Neolithic time. In 1973, the Peruvian ethnologist Dr. Victoria de la Jara proved to a Congress for Andean Archaeology at Lima that the Incas had had a script. She spent 10 years doing research on the geometrical patterns of Inca pottery and urns and had come to the conclusion that these patterns were in fact characters with a content ranging from the simple to the highly complex. They were language symbols relating historical events, myths, and poetry, with a grammar based on groupings of complementary colors. Generations of male scholars had claimed that the Incas had used no language script. In fact, they were not looking in the right place or in the right way. All right, moving on to the next section, the first speech, which is on page 39. Did women also develop the spoken language? From the earliest hunting and gathering times, we know that the men spent long, silent, and often solitary days away on the hunt. It takes silence to track animals. Meanwhile, the women worked collectively in or near the camp, surrounded by children, talking and singing. Language must have developed in the first intimate relations between mother and child, and between women working together for the kin group's daily sustenance. Alexander Marshak, renegade student of the Paleolithic period, has already proposed the thesis that human speech developed not among male hunters, but in a childhood setting among females working together. We can't go back in time to confirm this thesis, but we can confirm its probability by looking around us at everyday life and at the development of individual speech. As William Irwin Thompson writes, quote, "Food sharing in a home base sets up the ideal conditions for communication, babbling, clowning, and play." End quote. We've all seen how speech begins, for each human child, in this home atmosphere of babble and play. Sound communication begins between mother and child at the very beginning, during the intense gazing between them in the days after birth. Thompson refers to recent studies of newborns, 1 or 2 days old, who move their arms and legs in rhythmic synchrony with the pulse of their mother's words. The newborn is literally dancing to language before he or she can utter a word. Even earlier, the child in the womb can hear its mother's voice and comes to recognize it a few months before birth. We also know that growing girls of all cultures and linguistic backgrounds are much more language proficient than boys of the same age. Finally, many mothers have the strong feeling that, following birth, it is speech that takes the place of the umbilical cord. It is speech that continues to bind us quite viscerally to the growing child, and through which passes the social food of instruction, warning, and communication with a growing consciousness. It makes sense that we women who give birth to human life through our vaginal mouths, would also give birth to human language through our social or facial mouths. What kind of language? Thompson has a fascinating idea that women's plant collecting activities were related to the development of a kind of mental vocabulary dictionary and classification system. Quote, "The gathering of useful plants is an exercise in establishing a cultural taxonomy of nature, precisely that kind of activity likely to establish a list and a grammar of discrete items." End quote. Plant gathering women would be involved in highly detailed tabulations of various plant and herbal properties. What is edible, what is poison, what is medicinal, what is hallucinogenic, and in transferring this information onto others. Over generations, an incredibly complex and replete botanic and pharmacopoeic catalog would be filed in each female mind. If you are a male hunter, it is not too hard to tell the difference between a mammoth and an elk. If you are a female food or medicine gatherer, the distinction between a poisonous and a non-poisonous mushroom, or between two varieties of herb, one toxic and one curative, can be very subtle, requiring most minute observation and a lot of educated guessing. A mistake could be lethal for many loved ones. So Thompson's observation makes sense. An important part of women's early language use would be a detailed observation and classification of the floral and mineral environment, an experimental classification that was the origin of science. But no women, Stone Age or Rock Age, ever lived by head alone. The constant pattern of women's existence has been the need, and the talent, to link mental activity with physical activity, with emotional activity, all encircled in these beginning times with the aura of spiritual activity. So, early women's scientific language, because that's what plant gathering is, a science, would be uttered side by side with the emotional language of social relations and the physical language of the body moving through daily tasks. And surrounding all of these would be the symbol language of sexual spiritual celebration. The first symbols did not arise from the mind alone, but from the holistic experiencing of mind, body, sex, heart, soul, and world all moving together, all one. This is the dream body language of women's ancient rituals. Dream body language is the deepest type of thinking. It is right brain thinking. It is the thinking of magic and poetry, in which left brain language is used for nonlinear, non-logical expression, and it is a mode of perception and power that Western culture has scorned to its own harm. A good deal of Robert Graves's research into the defeat of Mediterranean and European matriarchy by patriarchy focuses on the suppression by male linear logic of the earlier synthetic holistic language process. Graves says in The White Goddess, quote, "The language of poetic myth anciently current in the Mediterranean and Northern Europe was a magical language bound up with popular religious ceremonies in honor of the moon goddess, or muse, some of them dating from the Old Stone Age, and this remains the language of true poetry. The language was tampered with in the late Minoan times, when invaders from Central Asia began to substitute patrilinear for matrilinear institutions and remodel or falsify the myths to justify the social changes. Then came the early Greek philosophers who were strongly opposed to magical poetry as threatening their new religion of logic, and under their influence, a rational poetic language, now called the classical, was elaborated in honor of their patron Apollo and imposed on the world as the last word in spiritual illumination, a view that has prevailed practically ever since in European schools and universities, where myths are now studied only as quaint relics of the nursery age of mankind." End quote. Once again, this academic contempt of myth and magic poetry is analogous to the attitudes of psychoanalysts and Christian theologians towards what they call primitive or infantile or pagan thought processes. But in fact, it was in this nursery age, guarded, led, and elaborated by women, that all the basic conventions essential to human culture were born. And these primary industries, tools, arts, medicines, daily objects, and alchemical processes did not arise from the logic centers of the brain alone, but were the products of dream thinking, of holographic thinking, of mythic, ritual, and poetic communication between women and their environment. Man's hard-headed, pragmatic civilizations have been living off these first enchanted female inventions ever since. Poetic thinking is non-dualistic. Paradox and ambiguity are not exercised as illogical demons, but are felt and synthesized. The most ancient becomes the most modern, for in the holographic universe, each subjective part contains the objective whole, and chronological time is just one aspect of a simultaneous universe. Subjective and objective merge into an experience of cosmic oneness. Such a thought mode, of course, does not build huge political and corporate empires like Rome or General Motors. For these purposes, men have devised a language of logical precision, in which words can be used like knives to chop up one continuous life into mechanically unrelated parts, in which the visible, i.e., the intellectually possessible, dimension is stressed at the expense of the aural, tactile, affective, and mystic dimensions. With such a partial language, all kinds of destructive manipulations are possible. Against the earth and her creatures, and against the psyche itself. Rationalistic language is used to make lying, exploiting, enslaving, torturing, and murdering seem nice and legal, not to mention God's will and great material progress. Hopefully you can hear the sarcasm in my voice means those are in quotes. The language of primitive peoples, though not written, are as complex as the languages of literate peoples. Pre-literate people's brains are in no way inferior to the brains of the, quote, civilized. In fact, their memories and powers of concentration are much stronger. No African bushman or Australian Aboriginal child could ever be dismissed as having only a 10-minute attention span, as teachers characterize American schoolchildren today. Obviously, in current day, 2025, when I'm recording this, it's not 10 minutes anymore. It is much shorter. But primal people do see the world in a different way. The practical and the sacred are not separated by the knife of logic. The individual soul is not severed from the world womb of the mother. And this is where we all began. What has happened to us? Our primordial and practical, material, magical perception of oneness between ourselves and the universe is the innate female state, which, in this modern patriarchal world, we are all supposed to grow out of in order to become men. In the place of our ancient female mode of being, now referred to as primitive animism, the academic, psychotherapists, god logicians, existential poetry technicians, and new car salesmen offer us their own product called the agony of alienation, otherwise known as everyday life, which you can fix temporarily by buying something. This is how they talk. Man has struggled for centuries to free his divine spirit from the paralyzing fetters of the material cosmos, i.e., in his mind, he is disembodied. Imagination, the mother of human memory and creative mental powers, is assigned to the female realms, to biology and childhood. Jehovah, Socrates, modern hardware, and the GNP bid men to leave these picture-forming but infantile habits of the soul and turn to abstract thought. As men, we are to have given new bodies and new worlds by the Father Logos, batteries included, while Mother Nature remains at work as a servant of this enterprise, her energies and resources used to realize his thought forms and achieve his goals. The earth, the body, the soul, and the imagination will be allowed to survive only as handmaidens of the great male mind up in the sky. So the patriarchs have been talking in their religions, their philosophies, their physical sciences, their politics and economics, their behavioral and psychoanalytical systems for over 2,000 years. What are they really saying? We have only to look around us to see his vision for us. Robots, computer hearts, satellite missiles, ground zero, cruising nuclear penises targeting cities in barbed wire bondage. Our flesh has never been good enough for him. His babies are all quite metalloid. And these are our new bodies and our new worlds. He has so abstracted himself from the female imagination and the cosmic material, quote, fetters of Mother Nature that he is just about to blast himself entirely out of the picture and everything with him. Abstract thought, after all, was the condition of the universe before the female imagination began its childish picture-forming activity. Another word for it is entropy, the static show on the TV screen in the absence of an image. Will we get a glimpse of his ultimate flesh-free vision of ourselves just as he and his boys push the final button, as we get to watch ourselves, the world, and everything in it dematerialize before our eyes, courtesy of his advanced anal technology? And it says banal technology as well. For the ultimate feeling of the master male mind for his servant female nature is not love, but necrophilic contempt. And the apotheosis of contempt is a brutal will toward total annihilation. So, how did we get here? On the ground level of being, the average adult member of a hunting and gathering culture, even in some environments called sparse by our standards, worked only 15 hours a week to fill sustenance needs. The rest of the time was spent in leisure activity, arts and crafts, spiritual ecstasy, running, swimming, making love, laughing, eating, goofing around. In our advanced Western culture, the average male's work week is 45 hours and the average female's is 77 hours. A lot of employed people seem to be working more and more and enjoying it less and less. The unemployed and underemployed are working less and enjoying it less. Certainly, there is less joy, grace, creativity, and wonder in our average daily life than there is in the daily experience of the average Kalahari bushman or Australian outback Martakuja, those who are left. We don't have to prove this statement. We believe we all know somewhere deep in our being that it is so. Modern existence, in the long run, profits very few at the expense of too many. So, how did we get here? And how do we get out? Woo! All right. I am once again going to withhold commentary because I don't want to just make it about me. You're smart. You listened, if you're still listening to this right now. And if you could make it through all of that up to this point, then I'll just let your own ponderings take over from here. So, with that, we will continue next time, starting part 2, Women's Early Religion. And that's it. I'll catch you next time.